All right, friend, let's fix your writing process. In the October 1987 issue of the English Journal, Christine R. Ferris observed that probably no single development has been more influential on research, teaching, and textbook publication in the field of composition than the shift to an emphasis on writing as process rather than product. Or in other words, after teachers spent generations mostly taking out red pens and hacking and slashing at any and every error they could find, the 1980s brought renewed scholarly interest into how writing comes to be, and not just on the finished result. And by the time I was in grade school, that academic shift must have filtered its way down, because I remember seeing posters on my teachers' walls outlining the writing process. And it was full of gradient yellow pencils and smiling cartoon faces that accompanied a piece of writing from pre-writing to drafting to revising to editing and then to publication. But as simple and straightforward as that process is, you and I both know that it's a lie. There is no simple 5-step plan that takes every writer from an initial idea to a published piece. Once I got to graduate school, I was in a class where the professor asked groups of us to diagram our writing processes, and some groups stuck mostly to a more complex version of those canonical 5 steps, but I remember one group drew a looping and meandering diagram including a beleaguered sailboat sailing on the rough waves of a body of water labeled the Sea of Self-Doubt.
That's one of my favorite vacation spots. Actually, fun fact, the water in the Sea of Self-Doubt is just the right density that even life preservers sink right to the bottom. There's really no place like it.
But it can be hard to shake that version of the writing process that got digested in scholarly journals in the 80s and pasted onto classroom walls in subsequent decades. In some ways, it is a useful fiction. There's nothing wrong with thinking about your writing process in large, repeatable segments. But any useful framework has its limitations. Pre-writing looks like different things for different people, and it may not always be clearly separable from drafting, which may sometimes have to happen between bouts of revision. And then there are the people online and in books telling you what you should do to be successful, and others make up words and call themselves things like pantsers, as if their choice of process is somehow a part of their fundamental identity. And given all that, you could be forgiven for finding yourself doing very little writing at the sandy bottom of the Sea of Self-Doubt, because you don't actually know what you're supposed to do.
I'm sure it's hideous this time of year. We should go.
Well, this is all a long wind-up of saying that the all-caps writing process doesn't exist, because it's wild to think that any two people will create work in exactly the same way in every situation. But a useful writing process for you absolutely does exist, and you just need to do a little work to find it. So instead of telling you what you should do, I want to show you how to fix your process by paying attention to what you struggle with. See, telling you that you must always start with an outline is not intrinsically useful advice, but it is really useful advice if it addresses a pain point for you. So that's what we're doing. We'll be looking at places where you might be encountering pain in your process and then strategizing solutions. And of course, it's impossible to solve every problem for every person all at once, but hopefully we can get you some ideas that will help you to be more reflective and productive in your own work.
Self-doubt and pain. I can tell I'm going to like this one. Let's get to it.
Actually, speaking of pain points, for years I have endured a series of desks that have been sources of literal pain, whether they've been wobbly, cramped, or wobbly and cramped. Until that is, FlexiSpot recently sent me their E7 Premium Standing Desk. Now, whether I'm writing, grading papers, editing video, or consulting with clients, working at my desk has become more of a pleasure than a necessary evil. On the practical side, the E7 solves the physical pain points I've experienced over the years. With a wide height range and snappy response, the E7 rises or descends to the occasion, moving with me throughout the day. Earlier this year, I started walking on a little treadmill, and the E7 is both tall enough to let me type comfortably even with the extra height, and sturdy enough to hold a glass of water steady with each step. Plus, with a weight capacity of 355 pounds, it's more than up to the challenge of my normally cluttery ways. But no less meaningfully, I sent a picture to my interior designer relative after I set it up, and they responded, "Cozy wozy." And that's exactly it. I feel like good ergonomics often come at the cost of aesthetics, but not in this case. I opted for a roomy rubber wood desktop with an espresso finish. It's large enough to accommodate whatever I'm working on, and moody enough to accommodate all my literary brooding. And FlexiSpot offers all kinds of customization options to fit your needs and your tastes. They also offer discounts for medical and military folks, students and graduates, and yes, even teachers. So check out all that they have to offer over at flexispot.com and use the code YTE730 for $30 off. The link is in the description. Now, obviously, finding your pain points is an exercise in personal reflection. You're going to want to take some time to think about and notice the places where you typically get stuck, and then figure out ways to deal with them.
Writing with Andrew, the show where we tell you what you already know in far more time than you would need to think it yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Well, what I mean is that sometimes these pain points are elusive or we misunderstand them. For example, I think I occasionally experience what others might call writer's block. But of course, writer's block is a mysterious, uncontrollable force that you can't do much about, and it's also just not real. So the goal is not to cure writer's block, but to identify what's really causing it and then deal with that. For example, I will often succumb to a kind of block that comes from feeling like the project is just too big. Like, how do I write a whole dissertation or a whole video about the rhetoric of ancient Rome? I have to do so much reading and so much analysis and so much organizing and drafting, and on it goes. Now, I may have shared this before, but early in the process of writing my dissertation, I played a little trick on myself. I said, I don't know how to write a 300-page book that nobody will read about my research, but I've had years of practicing writing 30-page papers that nobody will read at the end of every semester. I don't have to write a whole dissertation. I can just write several connected papers and then mash them together. And yeah, writing a novel might feel overwhelming. But what if you just wrote 20 short stories that all happened to be linked sequentially? So don't think of your project as a whole big thing. Think of it as several smaller things. If you're dealing with overwhelm-induced procrastination, don't work on your novel. Work on the third short story in the sequence. Now, it's the same thing as working on their novel, but the framing can make it just feel less overwhelming. In a similar way, outlining is often an essential part of my process because, oh man, I just can't start writing. It's too big of a job. But I can at least make an outline. And you know what? Having that outline makes me see each of the little chunks in the project, and then I can just start chipping away, not at the whole thing, but at one little piece at a time. And earlier this year, I was in a consultation with a writer who writes primarily comedy, and they were saying that even though they've had measurable success with their writing, it just didn't feel disciplined in the way they wanted it to. It didn't feel maybe as crafted as they thought it should be. So naturally, I asked them about their process, and they described how ideas just come to them and they write them down and run with them. They had been successful with that strategy, but they were also dissatisfied with it. So I suggested that they stick with what's working, keep finding that spontaneous inspiration and writing it freely, but that they then add the step of turning that organic first draft into an outline. In that case, outlining would not be the first step for them, like it usually is for me, because they don't have trouble generating the raw material. Their pain point was in giving that raw material shape and direction. So write it all out first, summarize each paragraph as a single sentence, and then you have a little outline that you can use to arrange and rearrange each section as needed. So where do you get stuck? Where are you dissatisfied? If you feel like you have plenty of ideas but don't know how to organize them, don't try to force yourself into starting with an outline just because you think you're supposed to. But maybe consider turning a messy first draft into an outline and going from there. And hey, maybe that doesn't work, but at least then you know. For example, I once took a very exciting class on the art of teaching business and technical writing, and the professor was a true blue mind map enthusiast, so much so that we sometimes spent class in groups creating little bubble charts of the day's readings. I was kind of skeptical of the whole thing, but my professor was so enthusiastic, and it was clear that it was not just a teaching tool, but a real part of his own writing process. So I decided to give it a try for the term paper I wrote that semester, about grading papers. I'm telling you, grad school was such a blast.
And it shows, bud.
Anyway, here's what I came up with. I gathered up all my articles and started charting relationships and building clusters, and I ended up with a bunch of sources that talked about grading contexts, like the kinds of classes you might be grading in, grading philosophies, and practical grading methods. And each of those became really naturally different sections in my paper. It worked. The bubble chart got me to a paper. But I also hated it, and I've never done it again. The point, though, is that I tried it. So if I may subject you to a kind of lengthy quote, Don Bogan wrote in a 1985 issue of the Journal of Advanced Composition, though teaching students to improve their flawed drafts is important, it is more useful, I think, to lead them back to the origins of the problems, to have them experience the way real writing starts. The variety here is endless. Take the writer's notebook, for example. It can be largely fragmented and freeform, geared toward exploration of the unconscious, like those of Ruskin, or it can be more systematic, with daily entries involving a particular scene or idea, like those of William Stafford. Or consider the actual physical practice of writing, the time and place. It may be difficult to get students to write each morning before dawn the way Stafford and Philip Levine do. I certainly couldn't work this way. But the more ways of generating material they undertake, the freer they will become in their own invention, and the more likely they will be to discover something useful. More specific imitative assignments can be derived from the practice of particular writers. Students, for example, could be asked to build a poem from a prose paragraph in the Yeatsian manner, or develop a narrative from questions about a figure in a room, as Joan Didion did in starting a common book of prayer. They could experiment with the mechanics of writing, using a typewriter instead of a pen, or writing with a blindfold and earplugs on, a method David Wagner has employed. Obviously, not all of these ways of getting started will be suitable for every student, but as in the imitation of published texts, the artificiality, in some cases the very oddity of the processes they imitate, has a liberating effect. The goal is not great writing, but varied experience, and the rationale for this kind of imitation is that this is the way writers actually start working. In other words, every writer has different things that work for them. So your job is not to just follow the process and write your outline and then do 3 drafts and send the last one to a publisher. Your job is to try out a variety of things in order to A, find what works for you, B, expand your arsenal of writing strategies, and C, realize that different techniques might suit you in different situations. For example, when I was in college, it seemed like everyone went to study in the library, so much so that it felt like that was what you were supposed to do. But I learned pretty quickly that I spent all my time in the library watching people and reading the spines of nearby books, and none of my time studying. So it became clear that being in my own room was an important part of my process. And you'll hear all kinds of people extol the virtues of writing in monastic silence. But total silence is, for me, too oppressive to be productive. So some instrumental music is a regular part of my writing. Most of the work I produced in graduate school could be credited to whatever video game soundtrack YouTube recommended to me at the time, and lately, I've been spending a lot of time with Brahms playing in the background. You'll also hear people talk about their discipline and how they can sit at a desk for however many hours and just crank out prose. But I've noticed that sometimes the best and most productive thing for me is to turn my brain onto something else. When I'm stumped with a creative issue, I'm sometimes more likely to find a solution if I just take 20 minutes to play a game or watch a video or fold some laundry. It's kind of like that thing where the name of a city or actor is just on the tip of your tongue and it doesn't come to you until an hour later when you're doing something else and your brain has loosened up. But again, these are things that I've learned about myself over time and through trying out lots of different things as I ran into difficulties. People will say that you should go to the library, work in silence, and remove all distractions, but for me, the creative solution is often to break all those rules. And of course, there's a difference between, for example, maladaptive gaming and taking a 20-minute break to untie your mental knots. But like everything else, that's something that comes with practice. Don't forget, too, that your process will probably be different for different tasks. I find a lot of pleasure in handwriting, and I think writer's notebooks are a terribly romantic thing, but I've learned that I just can't compose poetry effectively outside of a word processor. Adding, deleting, and rearranging words are such a key part of how I think my way through a poem, and copying and pasting is just so much easier on a screen. That said, I do have a really hard time sketching out outlines on a screen, and I'm much more comfortable planning on paper. Different tools for different occasions. So try things out. Every time I say something on this show, there's a risk that someone takes it as a directive, as a thing writers must do. But I always just intend to create options, not rules. I may even make suggestions that sound contradictory because different things will work for different people in different situations. My professor was an ardent bubbler, and I am not. The only way you can know whether you are is if you try it out, and it may turn out that you love bubbles for figuring out relationships between characters, but you hate them for writing research papers. And wouldn't that just be a great thing to learn about yourself? I guess what I'm trying to get at is this. I see a lot of writers think that their problem is that they don't know enough, or that they have some kind of deficiency of skill or language fluency. But the more I meet with writers, the more I'm convinced that most problems are process problems and not fundamental skill problems. I was at a presentation once where the speaker was talking about the processes of his writer friends, and he mentioned that one always started their writing time by buckling the seatbelt that they had built into their chair. That writer knew that if they could get up and do something else, they probably would, so they went as far as to order a custom chair that they could not get up from. Now that's pretty dramatic and maybe a little extreme, but it's also a clear example of adapting your process to your pain point. that writer didn't need to study more or find a better writing group. They just needed to make sure that they didn't get up and do other things. So their solution was to make physical self-restraint a part of their process. And you can do the same thing, by which I mean adapt your writing process to your pain points, not strap yourself to a chair. So do you have a hard time seeing your work from a reader's perspective? Write it out and then hide it somewhere for a week or two. Do you get tied up in perfectionistic knots, worrying that your work isn't good enough? Well, then commit to writing a first draft that's as bad as you can make it. Make intentional awfulness a part of your process so that you can lower the stakes of actually writing and teach yourself that there isn't a mistake so grievous that you can't revise it away. Do you feel acute pain when it comes time to delete lines or paragraphs? Well, then don't delete them. Just paste them into a separate document where they'll be safe and sound if you ever need them, but where they also can't weigh down whatever you're working on. Do you struggle to find time to sit down and type on a regular basis? Put Google Docs or your app of choice on your phone and write a couple of sentences here and there between classes or when you're waiting to pick up your kids or whatever else. Just because someone says that you should write novels on refurbished typewriters doesn't mean that you can't write one on a phone. Because in the end, we come back to where we started. There is no tidy writing process with 5 discrete steps. The only writing process that matters is the one that works for you. And an important way to find what works is to acknowledge what doesn't. Where do you encounter the most resistance, the most dissatisfaction, or the most frustration? One of the things that I love the most about writing is that nobody has to see it until it's ready. We're not like singers who have to hit the right notes in the moment every time we perform, or chefs who have to add just the right amount of salt 40 times a night. Once the work is finished, it doesn't matter too much to readers how it got made. But it does matter immensely that you find a process that empowers you to get things finished. So the only thing you should do is the thing that works for you. And for better or worse, you just have to try things out and build your process iteratively, making note of the strategies that help you and the ones that don't. The pain points in your process may feel like problems, but they can also contain the solution. And if you, like me, find your workspace to be a literal pain point, check out the offerings at flexispot.com and don't forget to use code YTE730 for $30 off to upgrade your space and elevate your writing process. Now go start this year of writing off well by examining your pain points and trying things out to make your writing process more supportive, enjoyable, and fruitful. And we'll see you next week, as always, for more.
So it looks like flights to the Sea of Self-Doubt are actually really expensive, which is great because that means it'll be super empty. Plus, people aren't really going to the beach this time of year anyway. I think we should go. Sometime in February, maybe?
I'm not too sure. What is there to do there?
Oh, there's loads. You can mope, languish, bask in despair. If you get hungry, they have sludge vendors and slot bunkers. It's great. Don't forget, it's always really windy, and the water is just reflective enough to look like an accurate version of you, but also just distorted enough to make you hate yourself. Should we go? We should go. Actually, I booked the flight. I put it on your card. I hope that's fine.
I guess there's not really much I can do at this point, is there?
Yeah, that's the self-doubting spirit. You're going to fit right in when we get there. Oh, this is going to be